Hello and welcome to Quadriga. We can do this. That was the famous pledge uttered by German Chancellor Angela Merkel exactly 2 years ago as she opened the country's borders to a flood of refugees. At that time, more than 1 million refugees had poured into Europe via what was known as the Balkan route, transiting Hungary and neighboring countries until they closed their borders. Today, most migrants arrive via the Mediterranean Sea, mostly from North Africa. This year, some 120,000, considerably fewer people than 2 years ago, dared to risk the treacherous sea crossing. Far from opening the door to them, Angela Merkel's now saying that illegal migration via the Mediterranean must be stopped. Not least, perhaps, but because she wants to be re-elected in a little over than 3 weeks. Merkel's election campaign, haunted by the refugee crisis? That's what we want to talk about today with our guests. It's a pleasure to welcome Antje Bauer. She is a freelance journalist and Islamic scholar. She's been reporting for many years from parts of the world where refugees are on the move. And she says migration can only be prevented by fighting its causes. Creating refugee concentration camps in a ruined country is cynical, pure and simple. And Malte Lehming is with us once again. Pleasure to have you here. He's a journalist at Germany's Tagesspiegel newspaper who regularly comments on developments in refugee policy. And he says we have to admit that mistakes have been made in our policies regarding refugees. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome Mekonnen Mesghena. He was born in Eritrea and he fled to Germany in the early 1980s. Today, he heads the Department for Migration at the Heinrich Böll Foundation. He says Germany's not using the right tools in order to protect the truly needy. Instead, it's survival of the fittest. So let me just briefly take us back to this day 2 years ago. Let's hear exactly what Angela Merkel had to say back then.
And I simply say, Germany is a strong country. And the attitude with which we approach these things must be, we've managed to do so much, we can do this.
I'd like to ask all of you, starting with you, Mekonnen, did she ultimately get proven right? Has Germany, at least thus far, done this in the sense of managed this amazing influx of refugees fairly competently?
Well, Germany managed to receive all those migrants and refugees during the 16, 18 months in a way that it didn't collapse. That was, I think, the fear of the general public. Do we manage this? And Germany managed it in a way that it gets a larger support from the general public and, of course, from civil society. But it managed, yes.
Malte Lehming, would you agree with that? You said in your opening statement Germany's made some mistakes with its refugee policies. Would you say that decision 2 years ago was a big mistake?
No, the decision in 2 years ago was not a mistake. It was asked from Germany and from the Chancellor out of humanitarian reasons. Full stop. Nevertheless, I mean, Germany is a strong country. We have a big surplus in the budget of billions of euros. We have almost no unemployment. We keep... But the task of integrating 1 million refugees with very, very different histories, traumatized, cultural aspects, starting by anti-Semitism, homophobia, and all these things, still is a huge, huge task.
Antje Bauer?
Yes, I agree with what you said. I agree that I think that Germany managed. I think Germany managed quite well. But I agree also that we have still a huge task before us.
So this week, with German elections just a little over 3 weeks away, the Chancellor called that decision in 2015 a quote-unquote humanitarian exception deriving from the circumstances of that time. Let's hear what she had to say at a recent campaign rally.
We in the CDU and CSU are agreed that there should not and must not be a repeat of 2015.
So Malte Lehming, is she singing a different tune now, largely because of electioneering opportunism, or what's going on here?
It's not so new. I mean, even it started in autumn and the fall of 2015, when you have stricter rules for asylum seekers, when she basically switched from the open heart or friendly face that you can put on all these refugee things to a very pragmatic and I would say more conservative way of dealing with the problems. So I think this is no real switch, but it was a long development starting in the fall of 2015 until now, kind of real existing humanitarian things.
What do you think, Mekonnen Mesghena, when you hear what she's saying now compared to what she was saying 2 years ago? Does that reflect lessons learned on her part, genuinely, or would you say it's simply an effort to make sure that her Conservative Party doesn't lose votes to the right wing?
Definitely, everything is right, what you said. Firstly, she has to integrate her party and also her coalition. It's a campaign. We have a campaign right now. And the second thing is, of course, many changes has been done during the last 12 months. So preventing humanitarian catastrophe and crisis during summer 2015 was followed by a number of changes restricting the open door policy for refugees, etc. So she has been managing also in a way to get more restricted. So the sinking number of refugees today is the result of the policy change we have. So 2016, we had around 280,000 refugees, and this year, so far, around 120,000. So this is not only a rhetoric issue, but it is the result of restricted policies as well.
And if I may add, maybe she has underestimated the problem in the fall of 2015. I mean, the question, can this happen again, was one of the most asked questions that she had to face in the months after that. So people were just, maybe we can deal with 1 million refugees. Maybe we can deal with the task ahead. But will this happen again? This was the basic fear of many, many people.
Antje Bauer, if we ask what role all this could play in the upcoming election, two aspects are important. First of all, to what degree is Angela Merkel's rival, Martin Schulz, the chancellor candidate of the Social Democratic Party, actually saying anything different? He, too, says mistakes were made, also by the chancellor, but he faults, for example, the unworkable system within the European Union for the distribution of refugees. So how much difference is there really between these two candidates on this issue?
I don't really see the big difference here, and I don't think that this will be a point in which Martin Schulz can win over her, the elections. I don't believe so, because Merkel, after all, she did a lonesome decision in 2015 to open the doors, the frontiers of Germany. And then she had to see what was going on. She needed the support of Europe and she didn't get it. And she asks for the support of the other EU countries, like Martin Schulz does. There are two Europeans, and Martin Schulz doesn't bear the fault of this, of having opened everything in a singular act. And Merkel does. But they both say we can handle this only if the European Union is trying to do something together. Otherwise, Germany cannot be the only country who is really receiving lots of refugees. So I don't see there really a big difference between Schulz and Merkel. And I think as she has been changing her policy regarding refugees since 2015 and adapting more and more to what she felt was being thought in the middle of the society somehow, politically middle. I think this is even a strong point for her right now, because people say she handled it and she will be able to handle this in the future.
Let me ask you, in terms of what people think, Malte Lehming, to what degree is migration actually a high priority for a lot of German voters?
I think it's in the head of many, many voters. It's not a real substantial topic in the election campaign. This is due to the fact that the migration policy of Angela Merkel was supported by all parties in parliament, even by the opposition party. There was no representation of all the fears that were accompanying by it, of all the things that people were asking for. They had no political representation. So all parties were involved in the process. So there is no party right now who can really point the finger, if we're not talking about the right-wing populist party, who's not a member of the parliament, who can really point the finger. And nobody really wants to do the job for the right-wing populists and pointing now the finger to Angela Merkel. So she is quite safe, I would say.
So, nonetheless, even if this issue is not necessarily decisive for this election, clearly it's an issue that is here to stay. So let's take a look at where we stand right now on migration policy in general. And Mekonnen Mesghena, there was a sort of mini summit held this week between some European Union members to talk about migration. And Angela Merkel came away from that summit saying, among other things, she thinks that border controls need to remain in place in what used to be the borderless area known as the Schengen area of the European Union. Is that the right way to proceed?
Well, border control is part of any sovereign entity, be it a country or a continent. And I think it's just stating something which is a reality. The other question is, and that's the problem of Europe, that we have permanent elections somewhere, in France, in Spain, in Britain, etc. And the policy, European policy on refugees is very much based on this ad hoc policy because of some elections. So we have now elections in Germany some months ago. It was in France. So we're driven by this kind of campaign. We're driven by ad hoc policies, and we lack the vision and the concept. How do we want to manage refugee issues in the future? What is the vision of Europe to take responsibility on the one side, but also to protect its borders? So this is something which goes hand in hand. We cannot discuss only about border control if we do not discuss about how do we want to protect, because there is also the responsibility to protect in the world.
Antje Bauer, speaking of vision, did that mini summit have one? Did anything come of it?
No, I think they try to go along somehow in order to avoid the idea by the public that, again, 1 million of people will come. They tried many things. They tried a contract, an agreement with Turkey, which is, I think, it can work, but which is politically highly problematic because of the political development Turkey is taking. They have tried different politics with Italy, who is now trying to prevent the stream of refugees through the Mediterranean. They try these, what I would call concentration camps in Libya. So this is not, there is not a vision, because I think the problem in this measure has not been there before. There have always been migrant streams, but not today. In a globalized world, migration is much easier and much more frequent. And so I think everybody's trying somehow and trying to prevent for what they consider too many people coming in.
Let's take a look at where things do stand right now. The numbers of refugees crossing the Mediterranean are dropping, but does that mean that the situation is actually improving? We went on board a ship that patrols for Frontex, Europe's border guard agency. Let's take a look.
A ship on patrol looking for refugees. Often the crew only find indications of them, perhaps the remnants of a catastrophe that's already happened. During the first 3 weeks of August, 3,000 people were rescued here, as shown in this footage from a Norwegian Frontex unit. A year ago, there were more than 20,000 over that period of time.
This decrease can be attributed to the increased presence of the Libyan Coast Guard, worse weather conditions in the first half of July, but also clashes between different militias in departure areas in Libya.
The rescuers know the situation can change very quickly, as it did recently when they had to save more than 1,000 people. But where should these shipwrecked people go? Back to Africa?
And let me pass that question right on to Mekonnen Mesghena. Angela Merkel says that those who come for economic reasons need to go back to where they came from. How realistic is that?
Whoever comes in a boat, we cannot distinguish what are they looking for? Are they looking for jobs? Are they looking for protection, etc.? Because people need both. So whoever it is, people, even political refugees, seek for jobs. So it's not an easy issue to say these people who are sitting in one boat, we will select them and then offer them the kind of protection or aspiration they are looking for. It's not easy. However, I think it's very important also for politics to look into which instruments do we use, for what kind of migrants and what kind of refugees. And yes, we need policies which protect, on the one side, people who are in seek of political refuge. On the other side, what is the demographic necessity in Europe, in Germany, and how do we deal with that, and what kind of opportunities do we offer people who are looking for jobs, and what do we need to prosper in our labor market and also in our economy. So I think that's why I say we need concept, we need a long vision, how to deal with that. We need instruments, how to tackle the issue of migration on the one side, but also the issue of protection on the other side. So we need to debate and to discuss both instruments. Maybe there is also something which may combine in a more intelligent way the necessity for migration and protection. And if not, we need an instrument which tackles both issues.
At the moment, Malte Lehming, one of the instruments that is being used are detainment camps, the ones that Antje Bauer referred to as concentration camps in her opening statement, detention camps in Libya, which have been put together by way of agreement between Italy, Italy having been left, of course, high and dry by other European Union members in dealing with this problem, turned to Libya and said, let's make detention camps for refugees who are trying to cross the Mediterranean. Not an attractive solution, but a necessary one, given the EU's inability to agree on whether and how to give people refuge?
It is necessary, but not in the way it's done right now. I mean, see, it sounds very cynical. We have a war of the pictures as well. There was always famine, no employment, misery, war in Africa and other places on the earth. People are coming because they have a smartphone, they see which route to take, where they can have a better future, and so on and so on. What the EU is trying is twofold. First of all, to deter as many people as they could in making the camps as miserable as they can. And I would say they should be run by the United Nations and other humanitarian organizations, not by Libya or countries like them. And the second is to deter as much people as you can. Sounds very cynical, but if you don't want to have real fence-supported borders at your own landscape in Italy, in Spain, and all these Mediterranean countries, you try to levy the border question to Africa, to north of Africa, to Sahara.
As long as the push pressures are that big, there's no deterrent. You cannot deter the people when they don't see any perspective in the regions, when there is oppression, when there is famine, when there is a huge amount of unemployment. People know. But
these are different reasons. The majority of people from Africa are not refugees in the classical sense. The majority are migrants. So you have to solve the problem how to distinguish between the migrants and the refugees in a very early stage.
The problem is you cannot deter by violating human rights. I think that's the major issue we have. And countries like Libya, they permanently violate human rights.
Let me bring Antje Bauer in on this, because your opening statement made it pretty clear you do not think these camps are a workable deterrent.
No, because it's against human rights. I mean, it's cynical to say we have to do this in order to achieve that other thing. This is not an easy topic. Maybe there are other ways to prevent people to come to Europe in the first place than in order to be brought back. I don't think Europe can take all those who wish to come, because I think also that there is a war of images also in another way, that many come because of a wrong image of Europe, and then they can't go back because they are afraid they lose their face, when they come back and they say it wasn't what I thought. That would be to accept that they did the wrong decision. And so it's very often the whole family gathered all the money, they sold this and that. So there's also a question of not having a realistic image of what is going on once they arrive in Europe. So I think there must be a way of dealing with people who come out of poverty, but not only the way of preventing them to come here, but a way to give them perspectives, like you said. Because most of these people, we see them, they are not hungry, they are not people they are strong. They are the strongest of their family who come here. And why do they come? Because they don't see any perspective for themselves, because they don't have work, because there's corruption, because there's dictatorship. And I think there we have to put in place an international politics, which is coming back maybe to something like the values after the Second World War. This has gone lost in the last 50 years.
Let me just come back to one thing that you said, Malte Lehming. I want to pick up on that idea of a kind of a Marshall Plan for Europe, which is ostensibly at least the current policy of the German Development Ministry. But briefly, to your point about distinguishing between economic migrants and political refugees, the fact is many of those fleeing are fleeing situations of terrible governance, corrupt regimes that don't provide opportunities. So are they economic migrants or are they political migrants?
If they have to fear for their life, they are refugees in the classical sense. This is what the rules said, and the German rules, and I think most European rules, if they have asylum rules, they give you protection if your life is threatened. If your future is threatened because you have no perspective, that's not a cause for asylum.
Hardly a distinction that holds up very well.
It sounds brutal, but you have to make, in a way, you have to make these distinctions to strengthen the humanitarian aspects of helping people in need, in physical need.
To many extents, it's correct. I mean, the Geneva Convention is also over 50 years old. We have to talk about, ongoing political change in this world, the economical structure of this world, the environment. So the environment pollution we create here is also creating another environmental situation in other countries who bear our responsibility. So I think we need also to reconsider the issue of migration in many ways. So do we have an economic situation which provide perspectives for people? Do we tackle those issues on war, conflict, and also weapon business, for which we are also responsible in the West, etc. So there is not only the issue of political oppression, but also the economy, and based on our prosperity, people are suffering and living and losing their perspectives. So I think we need a holistic picture and a holistic approach in order to tackle the issue of refugees and immigrants.
Let me briefly ask all of you to comment on another aspect of the policy that the Chancellor's been talking about now with the election in sight. She said we need to address the problem at its roots, something all of you have talked about, and talks about the need to put more development aid, particularly into Africa. But Antje Bauer, that is a very long-term solution, and we're looking at a short-term crisis.
And the short-term crisis, I think we always have to try to find solutions. There's not the one big solution. I think there's not the decision we work with this and with that, but there are things which cannot work. Working with armed militias in Libya, it's sure that it's violating human rights. So that's something that will not work. Maybe UNHCR camps in other countries may work. You have to find solutions. There's not the one solution. But I think on the middle and long term, helping to support democracy and economic cooperation on a more equivalent level than what's going on right now will be the one solution.
And we need also to apply instruments which are on the ground, like resettlement programs. So there are already instruments which can be applied in order to ease the pressure on the issue of refugees in other regions and so on. So while we talk about border protection, we need also to talk how do we protect people and what instruments do we have which we can apply as well.
Malte Lehming, bringing this back to our title of our show and the upcoming election, issues like the long-term aspects of the refugee crisis, like the need for development aid, are these issues that are really on the agenda for German voters?
No, I don't think so, because you come very soon in the area of visions and of solving the problems of the world. Sure, nobody wants war, but there are wars in the world. Nobody wants. I mean, I would like a country like Malawi to be on the level of Switzerland, but it will take centuries to achieve that. So I don't think that people in election campaigns are talking that wide, long strategies and aspects of a very acute problem that we face.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.